Okay, so this morning is going to be a special morning. I am going to talk about the parent relationship, particularly between a mother and a son. So you guys know we've done like 14 messages on husbands and wives and gender and male-female roles. So based on all of those messages, I started looking at, there's something with parenting. There's a very interesting dynamic that can take place between a mother and a son as that son is turning into a man, as he's coming into his own. And so this morning is going to be really special. I'm going to talk specifically about that. If you don't have any sons, it doesn't mean you get to check out, because a lot of this applies to just parenting in general, so everybody still gets to listen. But obviously this morning is really special just because Nathan is going to come up and give some testimony as to his experience with his relationship with his mom and how the dynamics played out as he was growing up. But yeah, some of you know that about a month ago, I think it's been about a month, we booted Nathan, kicked him out of our house. And then upon us kicking him out of our house, confetti just rained from the ceiling. And Naya and Seth and Selah, they got out the kazoos, and we all just had this massive party. It was so wonderful. And finally, there was peace in our home. It was just so wonderful. That couldn't be further from the truth. We had a wonderful time as he did leave, but everybody was crying because we were just so proud of him, and we knew that this was the next best step for him, but it was hard to see him go. But it's a wonderful time that it's wonderful to see him taking that next step. So I do want to talk about Ephesians chapter 6, because Ephesians chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, that is probably the most quoted passage in the Bible about parenting. There's just not a lot in the Bible about parenting. I just wish, don't you guys wish? It's like we get some verses in Deuteronomy, we get some verses in Proverbs, and then we get these 4 verses out of Ephesians. And it's like, I have just wished all my life, God, why don't you give us an entire book for parenting, like the size of the Psalms, for crying out loud? That's how much we need. One chapter for every age that they are and every different personality. What do we do with the ADD ones? What do we do with the super sensitive ones and the ones that are hiding behind our leg? And what do we do when they're, really strong-willed? We need all kinds of information, and the Bible just doesn't give that to us. It's like God provided us with the Song of Solomon, for crying out loud. We don't need help with that. We don't need help on how to think about pomegranates and goats, We don't need that. We need a ton of information about parenting, and we don't get much. But we do get this. We get these 4 verses. So let's take a look at these 4 verses here out of Ephesians 6. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. So I want you to see what this is about. This is about voice. If a child is to obey their parents, that is because the parent's voice is ringing in their head. If mom and dad's voice is really important to the child, then the child will obey the voice of the parents. But the same is also true when you have a parent who is not supposed to exasperate the child. If that child's voice matters a lot to the parent, if that child's experience and emotional reality and future matters to that parent, that voice will ring in the parent's ears, and the parents will then not exasperate the child. So, what I want to point out to you is that because of this voice that we are supposed to listen to, parents listening to your child's voice, children listening to your parent's voice, primary point this morning, to damage a parent or child, all you must do is crush their voice. That's all it takes. And it's particularly between these mothers and sons, especially as sons are turning into men. What those young men are longing for, the thing that they need more than anything, is to know that they're respected. You guys all know from all of our study that wives, respect your husbands. Husbands, love your wives. These young men, they need respect terribly. They are longing for confirmation that they are a man. Just as a young woman, as a teenage girl, wants to find herself in womanhood and step into that, Same deal with teenage boys. They are longing to step into their manhood. And as that happens during that season, it seems like it can land on us all of a sudden, where the relationship between the mother and the son, all of a sudden it becomes quite complex, more complicated than it ever was prior to that. Because, see, when a boy is raised right, when he is brought up in a godly family, he will be seeing what he's supposed to look like in his father. And hopefully he'll be seeing most of the time what he's supposed to look like in his father. He'll be seeing what manhood looks like. And he'll see, okay, dad is the leader of the family. He's the boss around here. And mom is the one who follows dad. She doesn't wear the pants, he does. And also that son should see, hopefully he sees this, that dad has long conversations with mom, where clearly he is validating mom's voice. He is listening to mom's voice because mom's voice really matters to him. He's listening carefully and compassionately. He's drawing her hurts out, providing her with the comfort and healing, all with a good balance of grace and truth. He should see that dad loves and listens, that he is soft and caring, but he leads mom really well. And not only that, but he should also see that mom, she really listens to dad's voice, and she validates his voice, and she respects him, loves his thoughts on things, loves his advice, and his voice is louder inside her head than even her own. And she trusts him implicitly. Following him provides her with such confidence and security. So that's what the son should see in mom and dad. And us moms and dads, we're all very, very aware when that's not the picture that we're presenting. But as the son, as he sees that, he will notice things about dad, and he'll notice things about mom, and he'll begin to compare himself with mom and dad, and he'll begin to see, oh man, I am feeling and looking and longing to be a whole lot more like dad than with mom. Because dad is masculine, and I'm masculine, and mom's, a little more on the gooey side. Generally speaking, she's more feminine. She's hurt more easily, and dad doesn't take things anywhere near as personal as often. And so dad is just more steady on the emotional front. And so while the son does have a deep connection with mom from this whole childhood, what we really want to see in our sons is that as they get older, they actually attach themselves more and more to dad. And they want to behave more like dad. And as they get older, as they're stepping into their manhood, they want to not only emulate dad, but they also want to outdo dad. And they also want to become a better man than dad, because they're probably aware of the mistakes and shortcomings that we have had take place inside the home. But because he wants so badly to be viewed as a leader, he wants to be viewed as wise and strong and competent. The thing that he doesn't want, the worst thing that could happen to him, is that if mom or anybody else still views him as a cub, right? That is not what he needs. He wants to be seen more as alpha. And that, ladies and gentlemen, that should not be squashed in our sons. It will be messy at first, but that needs to be shaped, it needs to be sharpened, it needs to be cultivated and celebrated. If you want your boy to become a man, then you must cultivate that thing in him that wants to lead and be strong and competent. If you don't, if you squash that voice, all you're going to do is exasperate him. But like I said, it will be messy at first, and it can definitely cause problems. Because let's say that this up-and-coming alpha, he sees his mother as off sometimes, right? I don't know if all of us men, if we remember times with our own mothers, we might feel similar here. But as a young man, if he looks at his mom, and in his view, in his teenage testosterone-filled worldview, he sees mom and he goes, okay, that's emotional and that's unreasonable. So I shouldn't have to follow what's unreasonable, right? And so because of all of this testosterone, and let's be clear, there is unreasonable going on, but usually it's not on mom's side. It's because he's got 4 times the recommended dose of testosterone flowing through his veins that he's being a little unreasonable about things, right? But he looks at that, in that view that he's in his little emotional reality or big emotional reality, in that view, he goes, okay, I can't follow that. That's not something that I should follow. Adam and Eve, Adam did that in Genesis 3, and God lit him up for it. So you're not the boss of me. And that's the spirit with which he communicates. Maybe he doesn't say those exact words, but that's the message that he receives, or that mom receives from him. And so while there is a little bit of truth, there's a shred of truth to what that young man is thinking, right? There's a little bit of evidence to that there's some truth to it, but there's also a whole lot of folly wrapped up in that. Namely, you're not Adam, she's not Eve, and yes, indeed, she is the boss of you, right? But you don't get to crush her voice. Just because that's how you feel, you don't get to crush mom's voice. You don't get to lead her. It's not time for you to be alpha yet. He doesn't have the skills to be alpha. If you're gonna lead this home, okay, this is a home that's been in the works for 20 years, 23 years. If you expect to be able to lead this home, well, then you need to have that kind of experience. And you've only been on planet Earth for 15 years, and so it's just not gonna work. And so when he does correct mom, when he attempts to correct mom, it does not land with grace and care on mom. It lands like a lead balloon. And she does not feel in any way, oh, look what a respectable man he's becoming. I just long to follow him. Instead, she feels condemned and she feels attacked and she's scared. She's scared. She's thinking, oh my goodness, I hope we're not turning him into a tyrant instead of a gentleman. But guys, I'm telling you, in that moment, when the son is filled with his hormones and his manhood, he's up and coming, and when he has that interaction with mom, here's the thing, mom is missing him. As much as he's missing mom, she is also missing him. She is not understanding. There is a vast gulf between these two. Now, of course, I'm not speaking about Jessica because she's perfect and she didn't have to learn this by experience at all. But you do need to understand that it is incredibly hard for a mother and a son to really see each other in this kind of situation. Neither one of them have a clue what it's like to be the other person. She has no idea what it feels like to be a pubescent boy. She has no clue, never spent a minute of her life like that. And he has absolutely zero clue what it's like to be a 40-year-old woman who has spent the last 15 years of her life laying her life down for you, right? So they're on polar opposite ends of the spectrum in that way. And it is just like God to set this up. I've had the many conversations where Jess and I have had to sit down with Nathan and have long conversations during this time a few years ago. I was so confused very often. Jessica was radically confused. Nathan was confused. And I just remember looking up at the ceiling and looking at God, and I see God in the heavens, and he's looking down with me, and he's got this bag of popcorn, and he's just smiling and eating this popcorn. He's the one that set this up, you know? He's like, I'm just gonna put all these needs in them and watch them go at it and see how everything goes. Look at they're just learning. Mom's learning, son's learning, dad's learning. But God's got a sense of humor. But in this moment, mom does not see or understand, it's not on the forefront of her mind, that he is subconsciously trying to step into his own and prove to himself that he's a man. And honestly, he doesn't understand that's what he's doing either. He doesn't have a clue. He's just feeling a lot of stuff. But she does not get that. And so here, this very large cub is trying to be the leader of Pride Rock. And he's bumbling all over himself, and he's roaring, and he's pretending. And when you think about it that way, it's actually kind of cute. But mom does not see it that way at all. She sees this as something that needs to be squashed. It needs to be crushed. That is not a gentleman. He is completely outside of his role. And she's right. It's true in that moment. He's not being gentle. He is out of place. But what she's missing is, this is his first time at bat. That's the thing that she's not getting in that moment. Of course, first time at bat, you're not going to hit it out of the park. You're probably going to strike out the first time you're at bat. You don't get to play Beethoven the first time that you set down at the keys. But mom, in that moment, she's not seeing that. She's not seeing it because she's just too hurt to recognize that, to have that in the forefront of her mind. And so she's crushed and he's crushed because both of their voices are not being heard by each other. Mom just does not know what it's like to have 5 gallons of testosterone pumping through her veins. And so what he receives back with ample evidence from that, when mom does not receive him as, oh my goodness, you're so respectful and so respectable and so competent and strong, when that's not the message that he receives back, well then he gets deflated. He gets so hurt by that. It hits his respect button with a sledgehammer. Now, is that mom's goal? Is she trying to absolutely squash him? Of course not. She's not even in the same galaxy as him in the moment. In that moment, realizing that he's just trying to be a man and he's not in the same galaxy, thinking, oh my goodness, I'm losing my son and it's all my fault because I'm a failure as a mother. They're just missing each other by a million miles. And so what has simultaneously taken place, I hope you're grabbing this, the child's voice is not being heard and therefore it's being crushed. And the parent's voice is not being heard and therefore it's being crushed. To damage a parent or a child, all you have to do is crush their voice. So what do you do in that situation? What did I do in that situation? When we have these two that are completely missing each other. Well, what it means is you have to have a long, hard talk. And parents of teenagers, okay, so this church is going to be absolutely bursting at the seams with teenagers in about 5 to 8 years. We're gonna have so many teenagers around here. So this would be good for you to go back and reference. But I'll just tell you now, as you're bringing those kids up, you're already busy. You're already at your wit's end. Your hair looks good this morning, I'm glad. But so many of you are so worn out by parenting. And when you get these kids, if you're busy, you've got busy schedules, you're homeschooling the kids, if in that moment one of your teenagers all of a sudden becomes 10 times more disrespectful, feels 10 times more disrespectful than you've ever heard them be, in that moment, the last thing you're going to want to do is say, okay, let's have a conversation and let's talk about this for 2 hours. You are not going to want to do that. You're going to want to crush it. You're going to want them, just punish them, send them off to their room, and don't speak to them ever again. That's what you're going to feel like doing. But I'm telling you, that's not the answer. Your flesh will want to destroy them, but I'm telling you, your spirit must long and love and search for these conversations to have with your kids. These are the moments that will change the character and the future of your child. These are the moments that will make them. If you sacrifice that time, if you pour yourself out for them, if you're willing to suffer as you try to understand and hear them, because you're gonna have to try really, really hard, because in those moments, they don't understand themselves. And so you're trying to help them understand themselves so that you can understand them. It's just an incredibly difficult task. But if you do that, then Lord willing, He will use you to shape them into an amazing man or woman of God. But if all you do is yell at them and demand your way and stomp on their voice and their emotional reality and not give a rip about how they're feeling, and you don't show them in that moment by your own example how to be respectful, well then you're just going to be shaping them into something else. And this young man, in these moments, this young man is really hurting. He's so incredibly frustrated and he has no idea why. He's got some surface stuff, but there's a deep frustration inside of him that even he is mad at. He can't stand how worked up he is. And often in that, it'll take a long time. These conversations will take a long time to figure out what exactly that is. But ladies and gentlemen, you cannot teach and train a child as they need if you have no clue what they need. And why wouldn't you know what they need? Well, it's because you're not listening to their voice. Fathers, do not exasperate your children, but bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. If all you do is demand obedience and you do not pull out the hurt of that suffering teenager and mend the relational dynamics and give them the actual instruction that they really need, then all you're doing is pushing them away. So, in that situation, I have to bring Nathan into the room, and we talk about these things. So a few years ago, this was our reality, where we sit down and talk. We say, okay, here's what was said to mom, and mom needs to be able to voice to you in a safe way how that made her feel, what it did to her. And so we would go over those things. And really what happens, what really takes place there is this is actually fantastic training for marriage one day. Surprising to me, but that's what's happening. I'd say between the ages of maybe 13 to 18 is maybe some of the best training opportunity for a son to learn how to communicate and operate with feminine. It's great training for how he might be as a husband one day. Of course, he can learn and watch and observe, dad and how he interacts with mom. He can do that his whole life. But we need to remember as parents that these young men need to be trained how to lead with gentleness and how to have their voices heard by using very careful words. We need to give them a safe place to have their first 100 at-bats in communicating with the feminine. No, it doesn't mean that he gets to lead at home. He doesn't get to lead. And no, it doesn't mean that there isn't discipline that might still need to happen at that age. But it does mean that he learns how to talk through his emotions and his concerns and even his rebuttals with his mother. And if you do this, things will look good. But if you refuse to talk, if you stifle his growing voice, condemn his every effort, then that boy, what's going to happen to him is he's not going to be well prepared for marriage. He won't know how to handle the feminine. If you don't train him, he will struggle with one of two things. Either he will struggle in not being a tyrant, or he will struggle with, I'm just going to be quiet. I'm not going to speak at all and I'll never assert my own authority or leadership because nobody ever taught him how to do it. So don't stifle him, train him. Proverbs 14:4, where there are no oxen, the stable is clean, but an abundant harvest comes through the strength of the ox. So that means if you want an ox that will one day provide an abundant harvest, well, then you got to be willing to go in and clean out the stable. You have to get the shovel out. When these moments happen, it's like, oh boy, I thought I was going to relax tonight. Nope, apparently I'm going to have a 2-hour conversation with my teenager. But man alive, getting the shovel out and doing it, it is so worth it. And it has been absolutely amazing to see, especially from Nathan about 14 to maybe into 17. In that time, the amount of growth that took place, I couldn't believe it. Pretty much the last 2 years with him at home has just been nothing but a blessing. He has operated with such care and respect for his mom, for his siblings, for everybody. It's just been absolutely inspirational. So, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker this morning. This is a man who is so kind and gentle. This is a man who, when he left our house, everybody cried, and for good reason. We cried because we didn't want him to leave. Because he's such a comfort and a strength, and he's amazing. He's a wonderful example to his younger siblings. We cried because when he's around, it's peaceful and it's happy because he's so generous and kind and funny. And of course, we cried because we are so incredibly proud of him. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. This is a voice that does indeed deserve to be heard. A man worth following, my son Nathan.
Okay, so I wanted to say how poetic it is that he said that thing about giving me a voice, and then I'm just speaking here. That's pretty cool. So, I'm genuinely privileged to be speaking before all of you today. I'm just so happy that I got this opportunity. I've been able to, watch everybody here grow spiritually, and now you guys are watching me grow spiritually, and I really appreciate that journey. So, as most of you know, I grew up in a broken home, The garage door sometimes still doesn't work, but... So my dad asked me to speak on the mother-son relationship today. Maybe it's because he is proud of me, or maybe it's because he's wise and knows, hey, you guys can benefit from my repentance. So let this 18-year-old punk, this little pup, who has recently flew the coop, tell you about his experience. So in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1, it says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth." As a boy, I would always struggle with the temptation to argue. I never consciously knew why, but I would always do it. I can't really remember the number of times that Dad did sit me down and tell me to honor your father and mother. And then I would cry immediately, just repent, and then tearfully, I would just do it again the next day. But I was really very rebellious in that way for many years until God's gracious conviction hit me around 16 or 17. I'm not sure. I really struggled in especially formative years to want to submit to my mother's authority because, as a boy, as a man, I felt like a man, like my dad said, 5, probably actually 6 gallons of testosterone were flowing through me at the time. And I felt that I knew more than my mother. Obviously, that was a very humble approach. But now I'm coming from a place where I can look at my mother and I can say, she is way better than I thought she was at that time. She's had so much grace for me, and I really appreciate that. I remember this feeling in me, though, that seemed really convincing, It's that you know better than her, you're more logical and less emotional. She doesn't know what it's like, and she's really overlooking what's important in the debates that we were having. Usually the debates that we had were she would start saying something that was maybe controversial to someone, and then I would just play devil's advocate and not know why, because I actually agreed with what she was saying. But no matter my feelings at the time, my mom was always right every time without fail and she didn't have any kind of special knowledge, but it was because she was my authority and, I needed to give that to her. She was right in trying to honor God with my parenting, and it just worked out really well because, she's just, again, this is like a glorified Mother's Day speech. She's just awesome, but eventually I was faced with a choice. I could surrender to God and my mother or do whatever I want in the name of manhood because that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a man. As I mentioned previously, I chose by the grace of God the former. My flesh thought submitting to me was better, but what sank in was that I'm rebelling against my mom, and in doing that, I'm rebelling against God as well. So as God is the head of the church, Christ is the head of the church, so mother is the head of her son, right? I later discovered an online preacher, Doug Wilson. Carlin Stutzman is a little bit of his fanboy, but one thing I learned from him was that it's more manly to obey your mother than to disobey her, especially when you're living under her roof. God ordained her as my temporary authority, and to be a true man, I needed to follow, honor, respect, and love God, and in doing that, I needed to follow, honor, and respect my own mother. And I've always loved my mother, but, intentionally humbling myself and not committing the sin of thinking I'm more experienced than her has a massive effect on how I view her. I see her now as someone to revere, and I cherish her very much. So I suppose that maybe I should talk to every male under the age of 18, under my age, maybe every male that's living under their parents' authority. So if you want to be a man, there's only one way. You must walk in obedience to the authorities that God put over you. Like we've heard a lot around here lately from my dad, everyone has to submit to someone. Everybody is submitting to someone, and it's ultimately God, right? And the greatest man to ever live submitted every decision to his heavenly Father. The truth is that your parents probably know better than you. And unless you're like a first-generation Christian, why would you think that you know the will of God better than your parents, It's not like I just moved out last month. It's not like all of a sudden I know better than them. So say you struggle with obedience to your parents. You have everything else figured out, but you don't lie, you don't lust, you don't steal, and it's all in the name of obedience to Christ. You love Christ. But you do not obey your parents because you are arrogant. God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. And Christ also said, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You travel over land and sea to win a single convert, and when you have succeeded, you make them twice as much a child of hell as you are. Again, those are Jesus' words, not mine. And why is he so strong? He opposes the proud. The Bible doesn't suggest obedience to parents, it commands it. Because arrogant rebellion destroys. God is not a God of destruction. He'll destroy sin. He'll destroy everything wrong with the world, but he does not want his good creation, his bride, to be destroyed. Neither do your parents. They don't want you to be destroyed either, so be humble and submit to them. So kind of just to talk to the parents a little bit too, let's just think of the children that are the biggest rebels. Does life go well for them? Do they enjoy a long life on the earth, as the verse says? Is their life full of peace and joy? We've all heard stories of kids that run away from their parents. They sever their relationships with them. Their parents beg them to come back. Their parents beg their repentance. But just like the story of the prodigal son, they never come back. They never repent. Until the end, of course, but that doesn't happen to everyone. You hear that your child has a run-in with the wrong crowd. Maybe they get involved in drugs and drinking. Maybe they're sleeping around and partying till the night's over. If someone goes down this path, again, you may never see them return to their loving creator or to their loving parents. They just stay with the God that they have made for themselves, which is their pleasures and their utter hedonism. We see this happen all the time. They essentially face the choice in this vulnerable spot in their lives. Will I glorify God with the rest of my life, or will I glorify my sin for the rest of my life? A lot of times they choose sin, and I've seen that in many people in my life, and that's just very sad to watch. My own peers, people I love very much, fall to their sin. I'm talking about Josh Jurgensmeyer, of course, but as we can see, there's a major problem somewhere. Many of you may not think that I am qualified to speak on the topic of parenting, which I'm not. I've never had the privilege of raising a child, but here's my 2 cents about it. Proverbs 22:6 states that you should start your children off in the way that they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. The problem is implicit in this command. The verse presumes that people are turning from the Lord, and the verse tells us why. They weren't set off in the way that they should go. So the sovereign Lord gives you responsibility to train this child in a way that honors God. He placed you in this house, maybe so that way the child could learn to honor God, because, God knows that you are a God-honoring parent. And maybe if the child was placed anywhere else, he would not come to know the Lord. So generally speaking, the God-honoring discipline and training of your children will yield good fruit. My parents disciplined, discipled, and trained me to be who I am today. And I'm not claiming to be anything special, but I can say with genuine confidence that my parents raised me nearly perfectly. They would most certainly disagree, but I would not change a single thing about it. They trained me with God in mind, and that's really all God can ask for from them. Not only did they have God in mind either, but they acted in a way that honors him. They would always talk to me about God and train me to see him in everything in life. They taught me to pray, and I began to pray on my own. I saw my mom read her Bible every morning, and I began to read my own. I listened to my dad teach at Kirkwood and here at church, and I began to listen to that and apply it to my own life. So monkey see, monkey do, right? Be the example to your kids. They're always watching. So the very heart of my message, what I'm trying to say to you guys this morning, is that parents need to be actively involved in their child's spiritual walk by showing them how to see God everywhere. That's what my parents did with me, and I can say that I am definitely a better person because of it. As a parent, you are their greatest example, especially at a young age. Teach them to pray, teach them to read their Bible, and teach them to walk with God. Because my parents taught me to walk with him, I have a much stronger foundation to build upon, unlike many of my peers who, again, I witness fall every single day. Proverbs 4:5 says, "Get wisdom, get insight, do not forget, and do not turn from the words of my mouth." So Solomon, the author of most of the Proverbs, he referred to the reader quite often as my son, so he was writing these Proverbs to his son. He wanted his sons to read that. So putting 2 and 2 together, obviously Solomon did not want his sons to be able to depart from the words that he was speaking, what he was writing. And I can definitely say the same thing in my experience. My dad, like Solomon, longs for me to hold fast even when I'm old to his words. I know that my parents support and even desire whatever path God lays before me. I know they want what's best for me. So in trusting God with raising your children, you can train them to trust him as well. They have trained me to be able to glorify God in whatever circumstances I'm going through. No matter what, because I am a sinful man, I will always struggle with trusting God. But I can definitely have, again, a stronger foundation to build upon because of it. And I can sing with joy at church here, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. And as a parent, this should be the same attitude you have for your children, right? Their lot is in God's hands. As a son, my parents taught me to have that same attitude. I know that because I am human, I will struggle, again, because of my suffering. But when I am in fellowship with God, I have no worries about my future, what God has in store for me. He always blesses those who pursue him. As the verse says in Romans 8, he works all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. That does not mean here on this earth necessarily, but in heaven we will be so much more glorified because of our sufferings. As long as your children belong to Christ, the same promise that is true for you will be true for them. And behold, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. This principle is indeed true. If you start your children off in the way they should go, that even when they are old, they will not turn from it. As parents, you will do the first part of the verse, and you can trust God and your child with the second part. Again, thank you for the wonderful opportunity. You guys can go ahead and take a minute to think, pray, or discuss whatever was most meaningful to you about today's message. And the band will close us with a song.